All right. So, AP students, remote learning. You know all the challenges that we've been facing at school. Two judges in Lawrence, myself, your teacher, we're all facing technological difficulties. So this is part two. This is part two. This is like the sequel to the first one that we did, and it's going to be bigger and better, and we're going to keep rolling with it. So obviously, Mark was talking a little bit about the close down and the impact, and I think we got the bulk of his statement, which was great. But both Mark and you, Michael, you both talked upon a concept called due process. Could you just share that with my students, what due process means?
Well, Mark, do you want to go first this time?
Yeah, I think it's just easier to equate due process with fairness. There's administrative due process and substantive due process, but essentially, we are all, as citizens, under the Constitution, entitled to due process or fairness, fair process. That is, in say in the criminal setting, you have a right to know the nature of the charge that you are facing. You have the right to have an attorney represent you. You have a right, as I said earlier, to confront your accuser. You have a right to ensure that the constitutional principles, such as the Fourth Amendment, freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures, are complied with by the government. So those are, it's kind of the infrastructure for due process, fairness, and all citizens are entitled to that. So whenever you hear due process, sounds like a fancy term. Just think process is similar to procedure, a fair process and or procedure. So that's kind of a quick way of thinking of what due process means.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, so the only thing I would add to that is, as judges, when we're dealing with due process, we are usually confronted with issues about, for example, police officers who may not have followed the law when it comes to a person's due process rights, such as you have to give Miranda rights after you arrest someone. You have to get a search warrant if you want to go into someone's house. So there's all these due process rights that have been flushed out over the course of time with specific case examples. And we as judges, as I've said in the past when I presented, we're kind of like referees where we have to hear from the government, why was the officer justified in doing this? And then we hear from the defendant's attorney who will offer a different view that the officer did not afford due process. Now, the interesting part of this is, in light of the pandemic, we, the court, we're now looking at what we're doing as on this issue of due process. For example, you have the right to a jury trial. Every citizen has a right. That's in the Constitution. Well, okay, we're the ones who facilitate that. We provide the courthouse, we provide the jurors, the forum, the venue, the courtroom. Well, we're not, and understandably so. And this is where I think it's going to become very interesting because there's an argument on both sides here. We can't give you a jury duty because of the public health issue. But a defendant can simply look at the Constitution and say, well, gee, the forefathers, they didn't talk about an exception. There was no such thing as a pandemic. So this is uncharted water. Obviously the SJC is going to have to give continued guidance as we go forward as to how we're going to deal with this issue. So that's an example of due process being impacted by the courts.
That's a really great analogy. So I think we're going to go on to the next topic, and we're going to go back a little bit. And I think I think the kids would be very, very interested in both of you talking about this. And we'll have Mark go first. Judge Sullivan, if you want to just tell us how, this is a question that came from an AP student. How and why did you become a judge? Can you just take a little bit of the time? And I know you've done this at Civics Day before, Your Honor. Could you just give us a little time about your journey, your process of getting from, it doesn't have to be from 8th grade, but from high school, college, through law school to the courts?
Sure. First of all, I can tell the 8th graders that if you're worried and concerned about what you're going to be when you grow up, don't worry about it. I didn't decide to go to law school until my senior year in college, when two of my best friends were going for the LSAT, which is kind of the equivalent of an SAT for college.
Great.
It's a law admission test to get into law school. And I turned to one of my friends. I said, I thought you had to be smart to take that. but I no disrespect. And I said, all right, so I'll go take it. So I took the LSAT. I scored okay and enough to get in. And my two friends never went. And I ended up going to law school, and I'm sitting in my first year wondering, maybe I'll be a transaction type lawyer, maybe do corporate tax or business tax or real estate law and things like that. And then I was introduced to litigation, which I enjoyed. I took a litigation class. So my career kind of went from there. My dean was a former Air Force judge advocate, a military lawyer, and that intrigued me. So the combination of my interest in litigation and the military, I'm a big history buff. I signed up with the Marines, so I went into the Marine Judge Advocate program while I was still in law school. So between my sophomore year or my second year and third year, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant. And then once I finished law school and passed the bar, I went on active duty for 3 years with the Marines out and I was stationed at Camp Pendleton, California. And I was torn between staying in the military, which I enjoyed the culture, I made great friends there, but also the pull to come home back to New England and the Northeast. So I decided I would stay in the reserves, which is, drilling 1 week in a month, but also, and I returned, I came back home. I landed a job with the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office. I was a prosecutor there for just over 6 years. I got married and had my oldest son was on the way, so the District Attorney's Office doesn't pay that well. It's great work, but it's hard to make a living. So I went into private practice for about 10 years. I went to work with a couple firms. I partnered up with a couple of friends at some point. And in the meantime, at about my 9th or 10th year in private practice, I saw an opportunity with the judiciary. I filled out an application, got some interest, got some traction. And I was before the Judicial Nominating Committee. They wanted to have an interview with me. So you interview with about 25 lawyers sitting around the biggest conference table I've ever seen.
Wow.
And they fire some questions at you. It's the first part of this vetting process. And then they took a vote after I left, and they forwarded my name to the governor. And Governor Romney was the governor then. I met with his legal counsel, and he thought it'd be nice to meet with the governor. I met with him. He forwarded my name to the governor's council, which is a further vetting body for this process. And then I had a hearing there before the governor's council. They voted, they take the information, you present testimony, you have character witnesses come in. It's a big day, it's very nerve-wracking. But then they take a vote a week after. So the next sitting, the governor's council votes, and I did well enough to get approved. And then it was just a matter of finding some time with Governor Romney for him to swear me in.
Wow.
And he became a justice for the Lawrence District Court 15 years ago. Hard to believe.
Wow.
Yeah, that was my, and I enjoy it. I really enjoy the work. I feel like I have an impact on what goes on in our community. North Andover Lawrence, Andover, and Methuen are the four towns rather that come under our jurisdiction. So what happens out there in the streets, both civilly and criminally, if they're involved in legal matters, it comes here, and it's very visceral for work. We're very close to what goes on in the community. So I enjoy it.
Great. That's great. That's great. From the military, that's a very interesting story. And before we get to Michael, I just want the students to note that the two of you are probably the 8th or 9th speakers that have said to the kids what they wanted, what they thought they were going to do, and what they ended up doing were completely different things. So I'm really, really glad that Mark talked about, what do you want to be when you grow up? I've told the story of myself, not wanting to be a teacher necessarily. So I think that's great, and I hopefully, it'll make all the students feel better. I know there's a lot of pressure as you get older. Okay, so Michael, do you want to tell us your story about you getting through the law and to becoming a judge?
Yeah. So as a kid, as an 8th grader, I had no idea either. I knew I was going to go to college, and I pursued a liberal arts background. And I think the fact that I double majored in philosophy and political science kind of forced me to look at law school, because the job market really doesn't have a lot of openings for people who major in philosophy and political science. So, my father, he was not a lawyer, but he always thought about that. That was one of his goals. He wanted to become a lawyer, but due to life circumstances, he couldn't. So instead, his daughter, my sister, who's older than me and myself, we were, I don't want to say we were pushed, but he always told us that with a law degree, you don't necessarily have to practice law, but it can open the door to a lot of other areas. And so that intrigued me. I went to law school. Again, notice I didn't say anything about a judge position, because here in Massachusetts, as with, I think, all states with exception, I want to say maybe California might be the only state where technically you don't. Mark, is that right? You don't have to be a lawyer to be a judge, maybe in California. It's something I had heard.
With Massachusetts, I think you have to, for the trial court, you need to have 10 years of legal experience.
Right. So pretty much across the country, you have to be a lawyer before you become a judge. So, I pursued law school, and I was a prosecutor for a number of years, and I never in my wildest dreams did I ever, when I started being a prosecutor, did I think about becoming a judge. But after 18 years of being a prosecutor and being in a number of courtrooms and in front of a number of judges, I started to realize that the role of the judge is so important. And it's really vital that people who are judges have a certain demeanor, a certain appreciation of the job, dedication to the job. And with that, over the course of time, I thought I definitely put my time into the DA's office for 18 years. And I thought, I'm going to apply. Why not? I think I learned from a lot of talented judges that I had been before. And I was confident that I could perhaps join those ranks. And I was very, very honored when I was nominated by Governor Romney. And it's been 13 years for me on the bench. And with every year that I've done, I learned so much from the folks who are before me. I mean, obviously, as judges, it is expected that we know as much as we can. But of course, it's fluid, and that's why I like the job. Not only do you learn about the law, but you learn about the humanity that's out there, and And every case is different. Every set of facts would be different. Every person's background is different. And as a judge, and this is the thing I like the most about it, is the fact that we have that freedom where it's not all black and white. You have to apply the law, but you also hopefully do it in a way with integrity, with compassion, because you're dealing with human beings.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Great stories. I really, I think all people like good stories. So, for both of you, my students, you've all come for Civics Day. This would have been the 6th annual Civics Day. My students are one of the first groups of 8th graders in the Commonwealth to be piloting the new civics curriculum that Governor Baker signed into law. And we're working with Harvard and the Democratic Knowledge Project piloting a curriculum. So it was a we were just, it was so successful and so great. And obviously, we're still doing it remotely. But one of the cool opportunities that the kids had was through my contacts at Harvard, some Harvard law students came to the classroom to do a mock trial involving the Tinker Supreme Court case, which the kids absolutely loved. And sadly, we were scheduled to do a second one with New Jersey versus TLO. So my students virtually will be doing New Jersey versus TLO next week. And we don't need to talk about New Jersey versus TLO, but just if both of you could kind of relay this to my students in terms of how does a case move from your court to the Supreme Court, and weave that into the concept of possibly a precedent and what a precedent is and what that impact has on our life. So either one of you can touch that in terms of the path from your court to the Supreme Court in DC. I know you mentioned the state Supreme Court briefly, but if either one of you want to touch this, that would be great.
You did the appellate work, didn't you, Mike?
Yeah, I did. So I mean, yeah. I'll jump in quickly, and then we'll let Judge Sullivan comment. But the focus of most legal matters are going to be heard, within the states. So we have two systems of government. We have the federal government. We have the state system of government. But I think you're going to find that the bulk of legal cases obviously are contained within the states. If you have a federal case, so that's where, due to the subject matter of the case, or perhaps if you're dealing with two parties, that live in different states, that generally speaking would get you into the federal court system. All right. So if you're in the state court system to start, normally it's understood you try and exhaust all the different levels of the state court system. So for example, say a case starts with Judge Sullivan or myself in Lawrence District Court. Let's say it's a search and seizure case. The Lawrence police stopped a motor vehicle. They conducted a search. They found some drugs. And the argument by the defendant was it was unconstitutional. The police officer denied my due process rights, and therefore the drugs, because they were seized illegally, they should be suppressed. That comes before us. That's the first blush of this case. And let's say I make a ruling, and I say that the government was correct. The police officer was fine. He didn't do anything wrong. The defendant can appeal. And that would then go through the state appellate system. Usually it would go to the Massachusetts Appeals Court. The appeals court then, they make a ruling. And again, let's say it doesn't go the way of the defendant, and it could then go to the next level of the appellate system here in Massachusetts, which is the Supreme Judicial Court. That's the highest court in Massachusetts. Ultimately, the SJC makes a ruling, but it's such an important issue There are maybe some new issues that came up, and now the defendant petitions the United States Supreme Court to review this case because there's a federal issue involved, mainly a constitutional right, a federal constitutional right that they feel has been infringed upon. And then it's up to the Supreme Court to review all these petitions. And basically, they get to pick and choose what they think is an important issue that needs to be addressed. And then it would be heard by the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, I have given you a very general capsule. There are, obviously tighter rules to follow with the appellate process. But Judge Sullivan, do you want to either correct or add to what I said?
Only to comment that an exceedingly small number of cases get beyond the Supreme Judicial Court. If you can imagine, in our court system here, just in Massachusetts, that's a relatively small state. I think I read some correspondence from the Supreme Court, our Supreme Judicial Court here. 40,000 litigants come to our courts every day, pre-pandemic. So there's a lot of cases coming through here. And now multiply that by 50 states. You can imagine that the number of cases that wind their way through the state court appellate system to the equivalent of the SJC with each state. And if it does involve, as Mike said, a federal constitutional right, usually you're dealing with your 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments, those kinds of issues. It's very rare. It's very, very small number of cases make it that far. So the idea that, I'm going to take this case all the way to Supreme Judicial Court, good luck. Because it's just not, it's the U.S. Supreme Court. The cases just don't get that far. Generally speaking, the court of your final appeal will be the Supreme Judicial Court, if you get that far, because I think there's some discretion. Mike knows better than I do. I didn't do a lot of appellate work. I had a handful of cases at the appeals court, but never went any further.
I was just going to say, an important distinction with the appellate courts versus the trial courts is the trial courts are courts of fact. So we would hear testimony from the police officer, from the defendant, maybe witnesses.
Right.
When you take a case up on appeal, whether it's the Massachusetts Appeals Court or the Supreme Judicial Court or the United States Supreme Court, they are courts of law. So they usually will be accepting the facts that were found by the lower court, but now are asked to perhaps correct the trial court judge who misapplied, maybe misinterpreted the law to the facts. So you just can't take a case right away to the U.S. Supreme Court. There should be a lower court ruling.
Well, I'm really glad that Mark made that statement where people, the blanket statement that people say, I'm going to take you to the Supreme Court. I think it was important that he brought that up, and the chances of you making it there are pretty slim, and the road there, which both of you touched upon really well, I think will make a lot of sense to my students. And I think when they tackle New Jersey versus TLO next week, that'll help. So we're getting close to the end of the show. We're getting close to the end. We're just about ready to wrap up. I think this has gone very, very well, and I'm so glad we have everything recorded, and I appreciate both of your patience. I'm just going to start off by saying I'm going to kind of throw you some light questions here to kind of, I think it's great where we kind of get to know the people, outside of both of you being judges. So the one thing I'm going to start off with is, as a teacher, whenever I watch movies or TV shows about teachers, it is like horrible. They get it so wrong. So my first question is, what do TV and movies get wrong about judges? There's so many shows. And then the next thing I'd like you to touch upon is, the best part of your job, the worst part of your job. So if you could both touch upon those things, and maybe we can start off with Mark. What do they get wrong about judges? What ticks you off? And then, what's the best and worst part of your job? You both clearly love your jobs, but there's got to be some struggles on some days, like all of us. So, Mark, if you'd like to take those, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. I guess the one thing that gets me both in the media and in TV shows, the judges that are going to be part of a Hollywood plot, there's got to be something wrong with them. So they're either corrupt, they're taking money, they're taking bribes. And I forget what show I was watching, and just watched this corrupt judge taking money in brown paper bags, and he's in trouble, and I don't know. The overwhelming majority of judges that I know, we have about 160 district court judges in the Commonwealth. They're really good people. They do the best they can. They show up every day trying to do the best they can. They're not wringing their hands thinking about, how am I going to screw somebody today? No, it's the overwhelming majority of judges are just good, honest people trying to do the best they can. And so unfortunately, the media jumps on the judge that perhaps, through oversight or neglect, made a ruling that splashes across the front of the Globe and the Herald, and all of a sudden they're in a bad light, and now all judges are bad, and this judge must be lousy. You know what? We deal with so many cases every day, and I leave work sometimes wondering, is that the case? Is this going to blow up all over the place? Am I going to be looked at in an unfavorable light? So I guess, as you can imagine, I told you a little bit about the vetting process to get here. You got to have years of good reputation. Reputations are built over years. They can vanish in an instant. So you've got a track record of hopefully some good solid legal work, history that shows your integrity, that you have good integrity. And so that's my one takeaway for watching media in Hollywood, what they do with judges. As far as the best, what I like about the job is, like Michael had said earlier, how I did a lot of cases, handled lots of cases at all different levels of the judiciary, and I'd see these judges early on. It was just some of them could be a little cranky. Some of them handled cases a little differently than I would have liked. And the more I did it, the more I felt like, I could do that. I felt like I could do that better. And one of the things when my so-called shit came in and I became a judge is that I would never, at least consciously, give a lawyer a hard time or treat a lawyer that appears in front of me like I was treated on occasion. Again, you've got some judges out there who are a little cranky. I try to treat every lawyer, every litigant, every person that appears in front of me with the respect and dignity that they would like to be treated, and they should expect to be treated. So I do enjoy that, having that kind of I wouldn't call it authority, but just the ability to impact someone's life, just giving someone an opportunity to be heard. Litigants, a lot of them, all they want is many talk about their day in court. They just want an opportunity to get in front of a fair judge, a fair jury, get a fair shake. And if the case, depending on the case goes, most of them are happy just to have that. A day in court, a day to have their grievance heard, and to have it adjudicated fairly. So there's that I like. I do miss the practice of law. There's only so much we can do here as judges. Our hands are tied by code of ethics and so forth as to what we can do. obviously we can't practice well. There are certain parts of the practice that I miss. So that's kind of in the rearview mirror for me right now. But overall, I do enjoy the work. I enjoy my colleagues. Michael's a good friend of mine, as are the other judges that work with me here. And we just had one of these Zoom conference calls with each other Wednesday night. And it was just fun just to sit back and catch up with each other and see how everyone's doing. And so I do enjoy my colleagues here immensely.
That's great. That's great. Okay, so Michael, you know, the media, the portrayal, if you'd want to touch upon that, and then just tell us, you know, what you like and challenges or things that maybe you have a hard time with or struggle with at some point in your job.
Right. So I think with the media, and so we're talking movies, TV shows, books, there have been so many representations of judges, and I would say for the most part, what you see on TV and the movies is really not accurate. And the two areas I would focus on is, first of all, a lot of portrayal of judges seems to paint them as heartless, harsh, no emotion type of individuals. And I don't think that's accurate. The second thing that I think is done incorrectly is the amount of contact that they show judges having with the lawyers. We have to be very careful. And I think people probably understand why we have to be careful about being neutral. And so in other words, if I have a trial and we take a lunch break and I go out to the sandwich shop, I can't sit down with one of the two lawyers, even if we don't talk about the case. Say we're talking about the Red Sox. It's not a good idea because it suggests perhaps I'm not being neutral. So we have to be very careful as to our contact with the attorneys, whether in court or out of court. And I chuckle a lot when I see these legal dramas where in the courthouse, one of the two lawyers comes in and talks to the judge in his or her office without the other lawyer being present. You can't do that. So those are probably two glaring things that I've seen misportrayed. And one other thing I just want to throw out, when Judge Sullivan was talking about how judges, you know, have to have years of experience as lawyers and so forth before they're appointed, and he's absolutely right. But I don't know if a lot of your students know that there are states where judges are appointed, like Massachusetts, and there are more states in which judges are elected. So every 2 or 4 years, like New York State, for example, those judges are elected. So it's a different scenario. I think it creates a really interesting topic for you and your students to eventually talk about is what are the pros and cons of having an elected judiciary as opposed to an appointed judiciary. As appointed judges, Judge Sullivan and myself, we don't have to go out and get votes. We don't have to necessarily be worried about how the public is perceiving our decisions. We're protected. Yeah, we're protected with that. Whereas judges who have to get elected, it raises a whole bunch of issues. So I just want to throw that out to you.
I like that. I like that question.
As to things I like and don't like, things I like is the fact that after years of being a prosecutor and always managing to perhaps having an opportunity to blame the judge for how a case goes, I like the fact that I don't have that opportunity anymore. Translation, I better be up to speed. I better be the one to understand what's happening because I can't turn around and blame a judge anymore. That's on me. So I like the fact that it's forced me to try and be as prepared as possible when I'm dealing with any lawyers who come before me. It's a challenge, and I welcome it. Um, the thing I don't like the most about the job is the fact that we do have the ability, and we've done it, where we sentence people to jail. And I don't have any reservations about doing that. But my problem is the fact that we never, and we can't, we just don't have the ability or the means or the time. We can never get the full story, the background of the defendant and the victim of a crime. You know, the victim can speak, the defendant can speak if he wants or she wants. We can look at their record, we can get input from their attorneys, but obviously, I've never met this defendant, I've never met this victim, and I'm limited to what I get in a capsule of time. And when you sentence someone to jail, I don't take that lightly. And I realize I have that power. And if I put someone away for 2 years, well, you know what? It's easy to say 2 years, but if you stop for a moment and think, that's 2 birthdays, 2 Fourth of Julys, 2 Christmases, 24 months of one's life spent behind bars. And again, I'm not saying that I regret doing it, because I think there are scenarios where someone needs to receive that sentence, but I just always feel that you never can get the complete picture of someone, and you know, you go home at night going, you know, the person who I just sentenced, what is their family going to do? You know, what impact is this going to have? So that causes me to always be very serious before I impose any sort of a jail sentence.
Well, I want to thank you both. The one thing about these Civics in Action talks, whether it's at Civics Day back at NAMS or here virtually, is I think it's important for my students to see both of you as people and not necessarily judges, just like a senator or a governor or a town manager. So I really, really appreciate both of you taking time out of your day and time out of your schedule. And this is very, very meaningful to my students and I. We're not in the classroom, but to give them this real world experience is greatly appreciated. I appreciate the partnership that we always have with you and Judge Rooney as well, coming to Civics Day. And it is my hope that in the spring of 2021, you will be back on stage in the auditorium or in the classroom, and you will be presenting.
Well, thank you. And I really miss bringing the basketball and the whistle, because, you know, you make the call. Was that a charge or was it a block? And I feel deprived this year that I didn't get to do that. But I want to thank you for everything you've done. And I think it's so important, civics. I think it's oftentimes overlooked, and it shouldn't be. It should be probably the #1 class being taught. And at any time, you can share with your colleagues. If you ever want me or any other judge to come make an appearance and give a presentation, I can't speak for my colleagues, but I'd be more than happy to.
I love it. I love it. And Judge
Sullivan, thank you so much. Everything that Michael said, Pat, it's always great. It's obviously we don't have the connection of seeing the students face to face, because much in the same way that but we need to have that face-to-face interaction with litigants and attorneys and parties that appear in front of us. We get the same, and I'm sure you do as a teacher, you want to see that you're getting to what you're saying. So that is a little frustrating. But I also miss the cookies and pizza, Pat. So
no Butcher Boy catering. Big shout out to Butcher Boy. They'll love it that we brought them up. But don't worry, we'll get that figured out. I want to thank both of you. I wish you and your families nothing but the best. What I'll do in a moment is I'm going to stop recording, and I'll just say a quick goodbye to you after we stop recording. Just for me, my students, this is going to be a great lesson. I think you're going to enjoy it. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is I forgot a couple episodes ago, I was supposed to say hello to my cousins, Darcy and Jackson in Voorhees, New Jersey. my great cousins, Jackson and Darcy. I just wanted to say a quick hello, as well as everyone that lives there. I promised that I'd do that, and I didn't get to do it. All right, so this is Mr. McGravy signing off for Civics in Action on a great episode. Thank you very much.